Welcome to the Delmarva Almanac. Each week we connect you to the best of Delmarva. Like other almanacs, our aim is to tell you a little bit about our past, our present, and events in the near future. I'm your host, Dana Kester McCabe. When we think about gardening, we usually think of vegetables, flowers, landscapes, and potted plants. It seems logical to me that you might also think of land conservation as large-scale garden projects. Recently, Dave Wilson, former director of the Maryland Coastal Bays Program and co-owner of Conservation Community Consulting, interviewed Joan Maloof to talk about just such a project. Here's part one of their conversation.
This is Dave Wilson. I'm here with author, professor, and Old Growth Forest Network founder Joan Maloof today to talk a little bit about old growth forests and sort of the need to protect them, not just in the Eastern Shore, but nationwide and really worldwide. So Joan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
A couple things we want to go over today is just, talk a little bit about the value of old growth forests. But first, I just wanted the listeners to get a sense of what is an old growth forest.
An old growth forest is one that has just been left alone to do whatever nature intends with a forest, to have the whole cycle of life in there. So trees living until they've reached their maximum lifespan, some of them dying young, and then just turning over and new species starting up without any management whatsoever. So in the past, they've been called virgin forests or primary forests, and currently we're calling them old growth forests.
Excellent. What about, we talk about old growth forests a lot, and I'm in the woods and I see forests that look old. Are there many old growth forests around? Have most of them been cut, or are we looking at potentially a lot of old growth forests on the Eastern Shore and elsewhere in the U.S. when we're sort of out and about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And someone asked this question in the 1990s about Eastern old growth. Is there any old growth left in the Eastern U.S.? And do you know that they couldn't answer the question? There was no documentation for that. So it was not until the 1990s that people said, well, let's try to answer this question. And it was a woman named Mary Bird Davis, and she took the time to do the research, to call all the states, talk to all the tree people in the know, put together this information, and what they learned was that there is some old growth left in the East, but very, very little. Less than 1% of our original forests remain. In this area, I asked the same question more specifically and started looking around and talking to everyone I knew. And what I learned was that in the whole Delmarva Peninsula, I could find only 19 acres that had been documented as old growth uncut. So it's still there, but it's very precious. What we also have are forests that have been cut once, maybe 100 years ago, 120 years ago, and they're recovering, but often those forests are being cut again. So the mature, even the second growth mature forests are not all that common here.
You've obviously done a lot of work studying forests and working on policy related to forests. Is some of that work how you started the Old Growth Network, or what was really the impetus for starting that network, and what exactly is it?
Well, it's difficult to trace back any story to its original source, but looking at it now, I think it might have started when I heard them logging the forest directly across the road from where we're sitting right now. And this forest was one of those second growth forests, about 80 years old, but with some very nice big loblolly pines and oaks and beech trees. And it's privately owned, so the owner had every right to log that forest, but still it was one of the older and more diverse around. So I went out there and I would talk with the loggers, and they were just doing their job. Nothing wrong with them, nothing wrong with the owner, nothing wrong with logging. Just, in my mind, I would say to them, don't you think there should be some forests that are just left alone and not logged again? We have no old growth left, but maybe some of these forests we should just leave to become old growth again, make them future old growth forests. And the loggers would say, yeah, I think you're right, we should. And I said, well, where is that forest that we're leaving alone? And they couldn't answer. And when I started to do the research, I realized that in Wicomico County, Maryland, where I live, there is not one forest legally protected from logging. And I was shocked to learn that, and I think most other people would be too. And that's what got me really into starting to write about these forest issues so people would know about them. Then as I was working on my second book, Among the Ancients, where I traveled to one old growth forest in each of the eastern states, I would be driving for hundreds of miles from one forest to the next. And I would say to myself, really? There's no old growth left between this forest and that forest? We have done such a good job at removing these forests that the average person is never going to see an old growth forest. And that's when the idea came to me that even if there isn't any old growth left in a county, we need to make sure that there is at least one forest that's not going to be cut again.
Join us for part 2 of this interview to learn more about the Old Growth Forest Network. Well, that's all for this edition of the Delmarva Almanac. We'd like to thank our community partners, the Friends of Delmarva Public Radio, the Community Foundation of the Eastern Shore, and underwriters, eatdrinkbuyart.com, for their help in bringing this program to you, our audience. Our theme music was provided by Brightside Studio. This show has been a Moonshell production. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, may the rhythms and tides of Delmarva bring you good fortune.